First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for getting me to 300. Woo! 300 subscribers. Next target, 400. I promised that I would do a tattoo tour if we made it to 300 before March 15th, and because we definitely did that, it is on its way. So stay tuned. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckisphere, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Becky, and every Tuesday and Thursday we talk about the climate here. The problems, yes, but the solutions, yes. So if that sounds like something you would be interested in, go ahead and click that subscribe button below, hit the like, comment, share, all that good stuff. Without further ado, let's get into the topic of the video today. And it is, without a doubt, I think my most passionate topic to date. Yes, offshore wind, bae, love it. But this is really where my interests align, and that is the impact of local news on climate communication and action. So get ready, let's get right into it. So you might think, okay, what do those two things have to do with each other, and why are we talking about it? So let me first back up and start with the current issue that local news is facing right now and why local news matters in general. So first of all, we have come to a point where it's pretty common that we just assume that the news that we are receiving through all these different venues is free. You know, we shouldn't have to pay for it, right? Except for those nosy little blocks that you get whenever you try to go on to an actual news site. The reason why those news pay blocks are there is because local news is struggling as all heck. And that is a huge problem because local news is really where the majority of news in general comes from. So you might hear a news headline on a big national news organization like CNN or Fox or MSNBC, but it starts with local news. You really hear it from the Oregonian, the Boston Globe, the Kansas City Star. There's a lot of local news organizations, a lot of small town newspapers that really are where the big news breaks. For example, think of one of the most famous movies for journalism, Spotlight. That covered how Boston Globe broke the sexual allegations claims of the Catholic Church. Boston Globe is in Boston. It's a local news organization in Boston. And because we have that mentality that news should be free, all these journalists who spend their lives doing this work and are paid to go deep into these organizations and hold them accountable, they are losing money, and they, as a result, are getting a lot of lays off. In fact, a Pew Research study found that between 2008 and 2017, a quarter of journalists from local newspapers in the United States were laid off. A quarter. Now, let me break down what that means. That means more articles per person for the news organizations. That means that faster news has to take place per person. And when we are talking about what news means, what a story means for an individual reporter, we're talking about the research, we're talking about interviews, we're talking about transcription, we're talking about writing the story, getting it through editing, finding the visuals, whether or not it's photo or video, and usually that results in them having to do those things themselves, aka doing the editing portions themselves and also doing the visuals themselves because we're running out of funding for more people to be able to do those multimedia things. And also they have to promote all of their work. They have to run the Twitter pages, the Instagram, Facebook, get it on different national news headlines. All that stuff has to be done by less people now for less pay and in less time because the news atmosphere that we are currently living in is asking for faster breaking news constantly. And in that sort of ecosystem, that leads to mistakes, which then leads to what we consider to be the fake news era because journalists are making more mistakes because they're running faster deadlines and they have less people. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckisphere and welcome back to my channel. A bunch of hedge funds have been buying up these dying local news organizations because they are not getting funded, which I forgot to mention. Another reason why is because the digital atmosphere is making it so what they used to rely on for revenue, which was print advertising, is no longer an option. So they can do digital advertising, but that's still minuscule for pay considering what print advertising used to be. Or I'm just, working up on it. So these hedge funds are buying up these local news organizations and creating these large chains of news. And that's problematic within itself because now you have one company or one person that is really determining what is important, what is financially sound for those newspapers to cover. But these hedge funds really don't give a crap about what is actually important for communities to know. They care more about what is clickbait, what is profitable. And we're seeing that a lot too. We're seeing a lot of news that it's not really news, it's like clickbaity, right? More clickbaity headlines, more biased reporting, because that's what sells, that's what actually makes money. And if the news organizations don't follow through with that structure, then they get laid off. And we are seeing that time and time again. A bunch of hedge fund organizations literally coming in as the grim reapers of these news organizations and shrinking them down to skeleton crews. And you better believe that with even less people, there's going to be even more mistakes, which then further kills the journalism reputation. So now we get into what are called news deserts. Now, news deserts are areas where there is no local news, which is arguably worse than there being biased local news, because no local news means that if there is some sort of corruption going on in that community, no one knows about it. You might think, hey, there's civilians that are going to figure it out, but civilians are busy with their own actual jobs. And a journalist's actual job is to hold those people accountable. So if there's no one whose job it is to hold people accountable, then people are able to just keep going with whatever thing they're doing. So this brings me into, what does this have to do with the climate? What does this have to do with climate change? Well, the decline of local news is a huge problem for local climate coverage. While there's already not that much local climate coverage on newspapers that are already existing, there's even less in ones that are news deserts. So in places that have no local news and let's say live near fossil fuel plants, they won't know if the fossil fuel plants are actually following through with clean air and clean water until suddenly it becomes a really big problem. Local news and small-time newspapers and TV stations, they are more trusted than the national news, and that makes sense. It's like your mom and pop shops, right? It's things that are more local to you. It's things that you can relate to. It's reporters that are your neighbors. So of course, that makes sense that you would be more trusting of the local news than the national news, for sure. So what if we were to actually focus more of our local news on local climate issues? Well, that would result in more people caring about the climate. And that also goes for local climate issues. It's a lot easier to care about a big overarching problem like climate change if it is presented in a way that it impacts specifically your community and you. So that really shows why it's so important for local news to be funded, which is why that's one of the main talking points that I have is make sure to support your local news organizations because they're not getting funded as much as we need them to. But also why it's super important for local news coverage to cover climate change issues, because that will then bring climate change home to a lot of people and make it relatable in a way that it hasn't been so far. So that brings me to how can we do better? Well, there's already organizations out there who are working to improve overall climate coverage in the United States. There's the Society for Environmental Journalists who have a lot of grants and scholarships and mentorship programs for different reporters and different reporting programs. There's also a bunch of different tips for local journalists who might not necessarily have as much experience with climate coverage to educate themselves on these issues. It's not really an easy topic to cover. I mean, it's very scientific heavy, and so a lot of journalists are afraid to even go there. But if you focus on the story aspect instead of just the science, then it's not as bad as a lot of people think. So this was a bit more of a rambly sort of train of thought kind of thing, though there are a lot of sources below which include tips for journalists that are interested in doing more to cover climate change issues, and also more about those pesky hedge funds that are taking up the journalism organizations and shredding them to bits. So, and a lot of really cool on all of our videos because he did a pretty good job covering some of this stuff over the past couple of years. So, without further ado, let me know what you think. How should journalism, how should local news be funded? I'm kind of a proponent, possibly, of having it go with our tax dollars. Because, I mean, local news, clearly, as I've explained, is as essential as police and public education. So why wouldn't tax dollars pay for it? I don't know. That's just my thought process. So let me know what you think about funding the news and about just covering local climate issues. On Thursday, we're going to cover part 3 of All We Can Save, and so look for that. And then next Tuesday, we are going to talk about nuclear, because I've already been covering a lot of renewable energy topics, so it only makes sense for me to go ahead and also cover nuclear. All right. Remember to talk about the climate every single day and to support your local news organizations. I will see you all on Thursday. Bye.